What's going on, people? So the topic for today's discussion is the Nintendo Switch 2. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it would not be your boy Neo if he wasn't a couple days late to the party. But honestly, I'm kind of glad that I gave myself a few days to really just let my thoughts ruminate, if you will. If that is a proper term, I'm going to leave this in the video. If not, well, I tried to sound smart. Sue me. There was a Nintendo Switch 2 Direct that happened last week, and Nintendo basically unveiled everything that we needed to know about the system, or should I say, everything that they thought we needed to know about the console, until 5 minutes later when shit hit the fan and the internet exploded. And it feels like every single day that has gone on since then, there's just been new pieces of information that have just either transformed your initial impressions of the Switch into something positive or switched it into something negative. There's a lot to discuss, and we're going to talk about it here in this video. It is most likely going to be a very long, rambling 30-40 minute discussion, so use this as background noise when you're playing a video game or if you're commuting to and from work. Let's discuss the Nintendo Switch 2. The Direct itself, I thought, was very solid. In terms of showcasing the system and answering a lot of the questions that we wanted to know on a surface level, I thought the Direct was really cool. The system itself looks very sleek, and it actually looks, dare I say, modern by comparison to its predecessor. Now, the original Nintendo Switch design wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing outside of course, the colorful Joy-Cons. It didn't have the greatest screen in the world, it didn't have the greatest battery life, and there were a couple of things that were extreme head scratchers. It was 2017, and yet it felt like Nintendo was releasing a device that wasn't even up to 2012 standards. However, with multiple revisions over the past couple of years, and heck, even a brand new OLED model, Nintendo has done their due diligence at fixing a lot of our complaints. So first things first, the screen has gotten a massive upgrade. You know, going from 720p with bezels that are almost as big as the game screen itself to a very sleek, modern design. It's still an LCD panel. It is not OLED, so that is gonna sting a little bit, but as somebody who has used a lot of LCD devices over the past couple of years, they are definitely a huge step up compared to what was released on the Nintendo Switch way back when. Combine that with the fact that it's not only a 1080p screen, but you're also getting 120 Hz with VRR support and HDR. So in terms of image quality, I think that this is going to be a monumental leap forward for playing a lot of those games. You know, HDR being a huge benefit to it. But not just that, having VRR support and having some games that have the ability to go up to 120 frames per second, I thought was really cool. In addition to that, the Joy-Cons are indeed bigger, which is a plus because even though I love the idea of the Joy-Cons, playing with them, especially if you have big hands, is some of the most uncomfortable time you will have gaming. Thankfully, third-party companies have come to the rescue with things like the Hori Split Pad Pro. This is my preferred way to play on my Nintendo Switch if I am in handheld mode, and I freaking love it because basically it's like they chopped a controller in half and they stuck it on the Joy-Con rails. Stuff like this is really friggin' awesome, and it's not just this. There are other companies that have their own variations and versions of it. But the fact that the dedicated Joy-Cons themselves are going to be bigger, they're going to be more durable, it's a plus in my eyes. Not only that, the rails for the Joy-Cons are gone. They are now going to be completely magnetic, which I love, and it seems like Nintendo has done their due diligence to make sure that, hey, you know, this is going to be a magnetized Joy-Con system. The system itself is not going to fall apart easily. That is really cool. So in terms of the aesthetics, in terms of the stuff that we wanted them to improve on with the build quality, it looks like it's there. It's got a much better kickstand by comparison to the little tiny flimsy one that launched with the original Switch. Basically, every single thing about the Switch 2 from a design perspective makes the Switch 1 feel like a homeless Kickstarter project that barely got through the finish line. That's what it feels like when you go back to that original V1 Switch. I'm not talking about the improvements later with the OLED. I'm talking about that original version 1. That thing damn near looks like they cobbled it together with shoestring, gum, paper clips, and rubber bands. Even though I still love it. It's awesome. It was a little handheld hybrid that could. So from a design perspective, I'm really digging what they're doing with the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, moving into some of the new features and additions, the Nintendo Switch is now going to support 4K gaming, which is a huge monumental leap forward for Nintendo. Now, the thing about 4K gaming, as you guys know, it's not really 100% 4K. You know, a lot of these companies have been using upscaling technology. A lot of these companies have been using reconstructo resolutions. I'm not going to make this a complete techno breakdown of everything that happens when it comes to game development, mainly because I don't care and I'm not that well qualified. But the idea that you are finally going to be able to play a lot of these Nintendo games in a higher resolution, because listen, as much as we love the Switch, that OG model, especially if you're playing really demanding games, bro, we're talking like sub 1080p, we're talking sub 720p, and in the case of something like Xenoblade, ooh, golly, I love it, but Xenoblade Chronicles 2, that bitch was dropping down under 480p. That was some of the fuzziest gaming experience I ever had to experience in my life, bro. But we did it because we love the game. But still, this is just like the light at the end of the tunnel. Finally, we can get modern resolutions. And if they could go back and patch some of those older games to the point where we can play them at 1080p with no drops into the 2.8, like, bro, I'm telling you, yes, it sounds like Nintendo fans have been starving, but in fact they have. But no fan base has had it worse than when it comes to Pokemon, because even something like Xenoblade, the fact that, yeah, it does not run the greatest on the Switch, at least you can see why. Those games are massive. Pokemon, on the other hand, we're not going to get into it. We still got some time. But yes, the system is definitely going to be a lot more powerful, which is great because it's going to attract a lot more developers. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh, we're finally going to get all these PS5, Xbox Series games. Again, at the end of the day, this is a handheld hybrid console. You know, there is only so much that they can do with the console. But if it's able to get a lot of those like late PlayStation 4 games, even some PS5 games that are not the most demanding, hey, I think that's great for the console. And for a lot of people out there, that's good enough, man. I mean, the idea that you're finally going to be able to play games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I assume Rebirth is going to be coming over, Cyberpunk 2077. Yes, these are old games per se, but it's a similar discussion that we had with the original Switch. If developers view it as a viable platform for them to make more money, they're going to spend the time optimizing. And at the end of the day, that is a new audience of gamers that are going to be introduced to these franchises. And in situations like Japan, that is a huge deal because in Japan, Nintendo is massive. They release so many games that cater to the Japanese audience that do even better on the Switch versus something like a PlayStation, right? So the idea that Square Enix now has a more capable console to put their AAA titles on, it's going to do gangbusters. A lot of people do not realize the importance of the Switch in Japan. So from a performance perspective, the Switch is looking good. But of course, you got to temper your expectations. This is not going to be a PlayStation 5 or a PlayStation 5 Pro. However, that will affect some people's perceptions of the console when you talk about the price, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So overall, what they were doing in terms of the performance, in terms of the design of the system, me, myself, and I'm a very big fan of, because while I do adore my Steam Deck and everything that it offers, just the idea of having a Nintendo branded system with custom versions of the games made specifically for that, where you don't really have to worry about compatibility issues, where you don't really have to worry about tinkering with stuff, and just having these games on a system that, you know, a lot of your friends can buy and you guys could just squat up with easily. You can bring it over to people's houses and you can just that whole gaming experience where you have a Switch, your friend has a Switch, your girlfriend has a Switch. It's just like a simple thing that like you didn't realize a lot of people had until they have it, you know? I love that, and I always love that idea of the social aspects of gaming. Nintendo is really keeping that alive on a local level. Of course, online is where most people play their games nowadays, but from a social standpoint, just grabbing your Switch, going to someone's place, putting it on the TV, or just having split Joy-Cons and having controllers, it's awesome, you know. And with a much bigger screen now, the screen is what, damn near 8 inches. You know, that is a huge benefit and plus for that local shared experience. But in addition to that, we do have some more features that are new to the Switch, but not necessarily new to the Nintendo DNA. Nintendo is bringing back game sharing. Game sharing is a feature where if one person owns the cartridge cartridge. I'm thinking back to the Nintendo DS days. But if one person owns the game, they can do like DS download play and share that game experience with 3 or 4 other friends. That's really cool, because that's one thing that whenever I go to other people's houses and, we start a game, we play it, we have a lot of fun with it. Sometimes we get a lot more people and we can't necessarily do it on one Switch screen, or, some people don't have a fucking TV for some reason, but if they have a bunch of Switches, we can do Switch download play. And yes, I know these scenarios are sounding insane, but you understand the point I'm trying to make. Bringing back download play where one person has the game and all 4 of you guys can play it locally. Stuff like that is fun in an era where, we're getting a lot more antisocial and just sticking to our own independent online infrastructures as opposed to all of us getting together and having the time to do that. Will we have the time to do that? I don't know. But in those situations when we can, it's just a really cool thing. So I love the idea of download play coming back. But speaking about the whole online experience, Nintendo is finally catching up to the competition, baby. They are introducing one of the most groundbreaking features I have ever seen them do in a console. I'm talking about game chat, baby. You want to know what that little tiny C button on the Switch 2 does? It is for game chat, baby. And okay, so outside of the fact that it took Nintendo 20 fucking years, I'm not even joking, it took them 20 years to have dedicated game chat on a system-wide surface level in their consoles. Not talking about individual games or something weird like We Speak or whatever for Animal Crossing. That's a deep cut right there. Having system level game chat is a huge plus, And then they showed off the fact that, hey, when we have our game chat, you can make it so it's like a whole experience. You'll have the game that you guys are playing on the screen, and down below you're gonna have like 4 different people talking. It's basically Nintendo's version of Discord in a sense. And another cool thing that they added is that you can plug in a USB web camera, so you can have these cool in-game experiences where the web camera captures what you're doing, and there's like game connectivity functionality with that. It's something that, yes, it comes off as a gimmick, but at the same time it's really cool, especially if you guys have played something like Uno on the Xbox 360. Again, those that know. But yeah, them incorporating game chat and adding more onto the social features, it's always a plus. Now, in the Switch Direct itself, that thing looked fucking janky as hell. It looked like it was fighting for its life. All 4 frames on screen. It's like, yeah, guys, we can all play together. I can't see what we're doing, but damn it, we can all play together. So fingers crossed that all those issues get ironed out towards launch of the system, because I love the idea of game chat being on consoles, even though these days most of us do use Discord. But the idea that you can all be there and not have to worry about like, oh, well, I have my Switch near me and it has to be near my computer. I can just have my Switch down in the living room and have a little camera and we can just have some wacky, fun adventures. I don't know. Am I selling it for you guys? Regardless, that's what they showed off there. Again, in typical Nintendo fashion, they are going to charge for game chat. You do need to be subscribed to their online service in order to use a feature that is free on the competition. Yeah, typical Nintendo fashion in that regard. But yeah, again, Nintendo, they are catching up with the times, guys. They got a 1080p resolution. They got game chat, man. Like they're doing the thing, you guys. They're doing the thing. Trust me on that. But then they went and they showed off the new mouse functionality, right? The new mouse functionality with the Joy-Cons, and they had this. It's gonna sound fucked up, but I don't know what better way to describe it. But they had this game where you're playing as a dude in a wheelchair, and it's like basketball. It's basketball with people in wheelchairs. It doesn't sound right, but hey, that's the game, and I'm not going front. It looked like a lot of fun. It looked like this generation's version of ARMS, or you see why you can't really be getting too quirky with some of these things, because you say one thing and it sounds like someone's gonna get canceled for that, but like this is their version of not legs, I guess. But yeah, it showed off the mouse functionality. Now I'm pretty curious about how that mouse functionality is gonna work. We do see that some games like Civilization are coming to the console and they use the mouse functionality. And then this derby basketball wheelchair, don't let Cartman get his hands on this kind of game. You can use that. You can control the characters. I wonder, like, how far they're going to go for other games in there. Yeah, you can play a game like Metroid or first-person shooter with that, but is it really going to be as accurate as using an actual mouse itself? And how frequently is somebody going to use that mouse functionality versus just playing the game on the traditional sticks or using gyro or whatever? If you're doing like something like a first person shooter or whatever, I don't know if the gimmick is gonna really take off like that, but hey, it's an added thing. It's an added thing that they're adding into the system, and it's up to developers to use it in a way that they see fit. So yeah, that's something that is there. I'm not really too interested in it per se. But then we got a blowout of games, a lot of third-party stuff coming to the system. That's all well and good. You got games like Elden Ring, you have games like Cyberpunk, Final Fantasy, a lot of the big Japanese titles and even some Western games coming to the Switch 2. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of that in the future because unlike the Switch 1, where a lot of developers were still very skittish about it because of the performance of the Wii U, I think that the Switch 2 is going to be in a way healthier position out the gate. So we are going to see a lot of the bigger third-party games come over to the console. I'm not saying we're going to see all of them, but I could see more custom versions on the Switch 2 because it is a more capable machine, especially if they're still releasing PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions of those games. You can definitely see a better performing game on the Switch 2. It's going to sit pretty comfortably between something like a PS4 Pro and a PS5, somewhere in that range. You might not get all the crazy graphical bells and whistles and things like that, but if you can get a really good image quality and smooth performance, I think people will take that trade-off because it is, dare I say, a portable system. But yeah, a lot of third-party games coming to the console. One in particular is a From Software exclusive, Dusk Blood. Now, this isn't a typical FromSoft game. It's going to be an online-focused PvPvE title, so it's multiplayer-driven, which I know is going to turn a lot of people off. But at the same time, the fact that they're getting a From Software Miyazaki-directed exclusive, at least a timed exclusive, is a pretty huge deal because the idea of that happening way back in the day in like 2017, the idea of Nintendo getting any type of third-party exclusive that isn't a niche JRPG or whatever is just it's unfathomable. But this is the era that we are in right now. So third-party support is looking solid, and it's only going to explode going into the future. Just all those freaking JRPGs come to the system is going to be insane, you guys, I swear. But after that, we did see more of Nintendo giving a reason to buy the console because all that third-party support is great and everything, but why would people want to buy the system? People buy Nintendo consoles to what? Play Nintendo games. In fact, that's really the only selling point that the Nintendo consoles have had for a very long time. Nintendo hasn't really had a traditional console, I guess, since the GameCube, right? The GameCube was their last traditional home console. They didn't have a crazy gimmick. I mean, the most crazy gimmick about a GameCube was the fact that it had a handle, which to this day is still freaking awesome. More game consoles need to have handles. But sometimes you just like to grab and hold on to something. Anyways, the Nintendo offerings for the Switch 2, we got them in weird waves. So first things first, Nintendo is indeed going to be adding in performance patches for some of their Switch games. But this is where it was very strange because some of them are going to be paid and others not, right? And then there's some that are going to be paid that are more expensive than others. So right now we have 3 tiers of performance patches. You have the free performance patches that are coming to games like Super Mario Odyssey, the Pokemon titles, and random things here and there. Then you have the $10 upgrade for games like Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. And then you have the $20 upgrades for games like Kirby and I think Mario Jamboree, where you get the upgrades in addition to new content. So it seems like to me, if it's a $20 upgrade, that's going to be with new content and performance boost. If it's a substantial performance boost update where they go in and they maybe increase the textures for some of these things, and they implement HDR and a couple of the other stuff, like uncapping the frame rate, giving it a stable 60, that'll be $10. And then if it's like a general stability patch where we're not really going to do too much in terms of updating the actual core of the game, you'll get a resolution boost, you'll get a frame rate boost, and that'll be it. That's going to be free, which I have some thoughts on that, just because I'm not saying that it was okay when PlayStation, and to a lesser extent Xbox, it was mostly just PlayStation and other companies that charged for a $10 upgrade. But when you saw some of those upgrades, it was like way more modes. You were getting ray tracing. You can get all this stuff that a lot of people say they don't care about, but you saw how good those games looked. Like Spider-Man 2018, that $10 upgrade, seeing how that game looks on PS5 with everything, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, yes, the idea of paying for performance patches in general on a system when it's like, dude, just unlock it. It should run the game better because I bought the system. Yes, PC gamers, I hear you loud and clear. But this, unfortunately, is the reality of the situation where they're going to charge for some performance patches. Now, we're going to have to wait and see the extent of which some of these performance patches really benefit the game. Like in a case of Pokemon, they could not charge for a performance patch, even though they could because, they could not because those games barely ran as is on the Switch. And those games, they're PS2 titles that run better and look better than the new Pokemon games on the Switch. And I'm not even exaggerating here. Like that excuse gets thrown around like, well, not excuse, but it's a criticism where people say, oh my God, this looks like a PS2 game. The Pokemon games they do not look good whatsoever. And the fact that they released it as is and they sold millions is just a testament to Pokemon fans not caring. And listen, if they don't care and they make money for it, who am I to judge them? It is what it is. But the idea of all the games getting performance patches is good for me. I really hope they continue that because there are some franchises that desperately need it, like a Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade Chronicles 1, X, and 3 all run decent on the Switch. Could be better, right? But for what Monolith was able to pull off, they're fine. Xenoblade 2, on the other hand, is ghastly, to say the least. That game, I say some games should not have been released. That game is one of them. Even though the game is awesome and I love it, that game is ugly as sin. I'm not talking about the character models. I'm talking about just the game itself and its performance. It runs terrible. I'm talking sub 480p HD in some situations because that game can be very hectic and a lot of stuff happening on screen. Go look up some gameplay. It's very, very bad. It's very, very fuzzy, man. So if we can get actual performance patches for those, I don't know if it just needs a lot more work, so they might have to charge for them, or if they're going to re-release the games again. I don't know. I'm such a Xenoblade shill. I mean, I'm replaying 1 right now, so I might end up buying them. Who knows? But there is one silver lining in typical, well, not typical Nintendo fashion. If you are subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online, I don't think it's the standard $20 tier. I think it's the $50 tier a year. But if you are subscribed to that, you get all of these updates for free, which is better. I'm not going to say it's good, but it's a better scenario. So backwards compatibility for games, getting performance updates, that's a great thing. There are going to be a lot of games that launch that are not compatible for whatever hardware mumbo jumbo reasons. There's a list of like 120 games, some really weird titles there like Doom Eternal. I don't know. But yeah, that is something to take in consideration, at least going into the launch of the system if you are going to be selling your original Switch and upgrading to the Switch 2 for that. And the last thing I will say in terms of the Switch's hardware specs, because, I'm not trying to make this a whole mumbo jumbo thing, is that the system, we did get a concrete idea of what the battery is going to be like. It's going to be anywhere from 2 to 6 hours. So roughly equivalent to what the V1 launch Switch was, which if you guys know back then, the battery was not good whatsoever. Like you could get maybe 2 hours or so in Breath of the Wild, maybe 2.5 if you're lucky, like turning off Wi-Fi and all those things. But yeah, it's not looking good. As someone who has a Switch OLED, I'm probably not going to sell mine just because I'm not going to get good value from it. And the thing about the OLED is that it has such a beautiful battery life on it, man. I can play Xenoblade comfortably for a couple of hours and be just fine. So this system, the battery life is not that good at launch, but it makes sense because with more revisions and then when they put out other models, you'll get eventually up to that like 4.5 to 9 hour battery life. And let's just be real, from a tech side of things, it is a lot more impressive tech under the hood. 120 FPS, VRR, 1080p HD. It is a lot more stressing and taxing on the hardware battery as opposed to the original Switch and now the OLED in its mature state. Like there are some things that we do have to consider. So if you are buying this Switch 2 and using it for portable play outside of the house, remember to carry those battery banks with you. Another thing is that the Switch 2 is going to have a new form of storage. It's not going to be using the micro SD cards. It's going to be using the micro SD Express, basically for faster load times, things like that. So that is something to take into consideration. If you are going to be buying the console, you have to get new storage. You can't use the old storage on it. It is what it is, but hey, that's life. That's life. Keeping up with the times, I tell you. And that's basically the gist of like all the tech sort of thing. Like, I know I was talking about the games and I went to the tech, but every single time I try to recall it, it just leads me into a different path. Like I said, this is going to be a long rambling video. We're already like, what, 20 something minutes in? But leading into the games, right? Metroid Prime 4, that game running 4K 60, 120 at 1080p. Friggin' beautiful, bro. And I know it's just a Switch game that is spruced up on the Switch too, but it really looks great, man. Like, the fact that we haven't gotten a Metroid Prime game in close to 20 years, if y'all can believe it or not, I'm just waiting for this. Like, I'm very excited for it, but I'm keeping my hype at very low levels just because of how long it's been. But once we get official release date, I think the hype train is just all aboard, bro. All aboard for that. Will we get remasters of 2 and 3 in the time? I don't know. We got a pretty good one remaster, but that was it. Nothing else. So sad. But then they showed off what I think is one of the best games of the show. Donkey Kong Bonanza, bro. That Donkey Kong game looked friggin' sick, bro. It did give me a lot of Mario Odyssey vibes. They have not confirmed who the developer is, but the game itself looked friggin' sick, man, and I can't wait to play it. And the fact that it's coming out in like, what, 3 months? That's the one thing I love about Nintendo compared to the competition, is that Nintendo, with the exception of like Tears of the Kingdom, they rarely have you waiting long for their games. They usually announce them and release them within the same year time frame. Tears of the Kingdom being the one exception, Metroid Prime being the thing that's just like, why is it taking this long? Like, not even just rebooting the game. Why is it taking this long for a Switch game? Regardless of that, it's one cool factor about Nintendo. They announce a game and it's out in a few months. And that is really cool. And I hope that it continues with the Switch 2, because it's just like nobody was checking for a new Donkey Kong game. Like, the first 3D Donkey Kong game in almost 30 years. And it's like, hey, it's out in 3 months. Absolutely crazy. But what does that mean for a 3D Mario game? Because a lot of us expected that with the new Mario Kart, we're going to get a new 3D Mario not too far behind. And we didn't get that in the Direct. They just focused on Mario Kart World, which looks pretty cool, looks pretty solid. You know, I'm not a big a Mario Kart fan as I used to be as a kid, but there's still fun things to play with friends. I am very much so a person that gets my ass kicked. Every now and then I'll win a race and then I will quit afterwards because I've peaked in life. I may have lost 6 races beforehand, but that one race I win, I'm going to go out on a high note, let me tell you. But yeah, the new Mario Kart game, it looks solid. You have way more players on screen. They got a little Forza Horizon open world thing going on, going from race to race and stuff like that. They're going to have a whole dedicated Direct to the game later down the road, which I think we're going to see a lot more about. But I think the game itself, it's an obvious thing to do. And the fact that they are making it a Switch 2 exclusive and not cross-gen is awesome. And that's one thing I'm very happy about with this Switch Direct. So far, we haven't seen Nintendo do too many cross-gen games. They are really trying to keep it old school and get new adopters onto the system as soon as possible. And you do that with a sequel to, what, Mario Kart sold like, what, almost 100 million units, like 70 million units, something crazy like that on the Switch alone. And then you have a brand new 3D Donkey Kong game, and then you're going to get a 3D Mario and all these things. You see what I'm saying? It's great that they're doing this because they have capable hardware, number one, to show a generational leap. And they don't have to worry about leaving people behind because this is just the next step in the evolution of Nintendo building out a generation. They're very old school in that respect, and I respect them for that. So, yeah, the Switch Direct itself was very solid, all things considered. It didn't have a lot of things that blew my mind, like, oh my god, I can't believe this, blah, 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 because they did spend the first half of it just showing off the system and then a couple of third-party games. But they had a couple of cool things here and there. Sakurai working on a brand new Kirby's Air Ride game, what the fuck? But, you know, it's like, holy shit, the idea that Sakurai is not doing Smash Bros. He's like, I want to cook with Kirby. I love Kirby. He's been neglected in terms of Kirby's Air Ride because we haven't got one in 20 years. So I'm going to do this for a while. Like, I know there's a lot of Kirby Air Ride haters online. What is wrong with y'all? Y'all just hate fun. Y'all hate fun. That game was awesome. But overall, the Direct, I thought was solid. I think that Direct, in terms of what it needed to do to show off the Switch on launch, to get a lot of people on board, it did the thing. And then that's where the shit show began, my friends, because after that direct, it just, oh my God. So first things first, they didn't unveil the price of the system nor the games in the direct. And that was the thing that a lot of us were speculating on. We're speculating like, what is the Switch price going to be? Many of us expected it to be around $400 given the current economic conditions. $400 for a more capable Switch, it seemed about right. A lot of people wanted it to be cheaper than that, but just based off of the tech that was going into the system, there was no way. When you compare it to the Steam Deck and all the other hardware in the portable space, most of those start at like $450 and they go upwards of like $700, $800, $900 depending. And that's being generous because there's some that's well over $1,000. So the Switch 2 having the price point of $450 to me is not the worst thing in the world. $450 for the Switch. Would I have preferred $400? Absolutely, but $450, I can deal with that. I can deal with that for a brand new Switch and what they're going to offer by comparison to the competition, because that's what I always look at it as, right? I look at it like, what do you get with the Switch that you don't get with the competition that's priced similarly? And the thing about Nintendo is that you get those Nintendo experiences that you don't get on PlayStation and Xbox. So if it was $400, $450, it's still a good value proposition with the portability attached to it. But then they just throw a wrench in it and they announce the game prices. Mario Kart World will retail for $80. Donkey Kong will retail for $70. And that's where we got all the other upgraded prices for things like the Switch 2 editions with the patch prices. And then they're actually doing Switch 2 dedicated versions of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, a game that released in 2017, will be $70 on the Switch 2. Tears of the Kingdom, a game that when the Switch 2 comes out, that game will be 2 years old, leading into a year after they got the system, 3 years. That game is going to be $80, so more expensive than when it launched. And yeah, it's just not a good look whatsoever. Now, here's the thing. The topic of discussion when it comes to the price of the Switch games, $80, $90, depending on what your region is. There was just a lot of confusion going around. A lot of people thought it was $80 digital, $90 physical, things like that. But it seems that for the most part, it's going to be $80 across the board. The price discussion is always, we had this same thing happen a few years ago with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series. Games started to go up to $70. It started with 2K, and then Sony, of course, was like the first major player in the console space to say, hey, our games are going to be $70. A lot of the same arguments are coming up again. Like, why are we paying $70, $80 for video games in an era where games are making more money than they ever have? Games are incomplete, games are buggy, this, that, and the third. And I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you guys one way or another whether or not a game is worth it, because value is always going to be subjective at the end of the day. What some people view as value for a $60 game, others might not. There's some games out there that I personally don't think are worth the price, but a lot of people get hundreds of hours out of it. So that's why it's kind of hard for me to say, oh, you should be getting X amount of hours for a game that's this price, because depending on the genre of game, you're going to get more bang for your buck. Like Persona 5, for example. This game retailed at $60, but the main campaign is like 120, 130 hours. And that's just for one playthrough. You can do so many other playthroughs of these games. So why is it okay for a Nintendo game to release and the game is like 5-8 hours, and then Persona to release at the same price? Like, so when you get into the discussion of the hours put into a game, it's always going to be subjective, because some people might not fuck with Persona. They might not fuck with Persona and like it. I think that that's asinine, but who am I to judge them for missing out on one of the greatest franchises? But that just is what it is. Yakuza is a great example. I freaking love those games to death, but somebody looks at it like, wait a minute, so you're telling me that these games all have 20 hours of cutscenes? Yeah, they all do, because they're really big on the story. It's like a Japanese soap opera. It's great. But a lot of people might not fuck with that. To them, I would say, delete my number. But it's one of those things where the value is always going to be subjective, right? But the idea of them going not to $70, I feel like if it was $70, people could stomach it, because that's just where we are at, right? Whether we like it or not, when it comes to gaming, you guys, gaming prices have not kept up with inflation. And you guys don't want to hear me do the old man economic lesson, but I have to. Like, gaming in general as a hobby has not kept up with inflation. When games became standardized at $60 back in 05, 06, It wasn't until 2020 where they increased it by $10, you know? So from that point of view, you look at all the other forms of entertainment and media and how expensive they've gotten, whether it's movie theaters, whether it's your cable bill, whether it's your light bill, whether it's going to concerts alone. Like a lot of things have been growing with the rise of inflation and, of course, unchecked capitalism. Ooh, taboo word. But gaming has been one of the things that's always kept constant at that price. And of course, there have been numerous forms of ways that developers can make more revenue with DLC, expansion packs. Now we have season passes and battle passes and all that stuff. But as a standard general rule, games have always been 60. And then there's 70. And now Nintendo is taking it to 80. Doug Bowser did just come out and say that, yeah, the price of the games, we're going to introduce a variable method. So what he means by that is they're going to look and assess at the development of the game, what it offers, what it brings to the table, and we're going to price it accordingly. So that's why Donkey Kong is 70 and Mario Kart is 80. Now, if you believe the words that are coming out of this man's mouth, if you believe the words of a man named Bowser, I don't believe him. I don't, because by that logic, in theory, it sounds perfect. Oh, we're going to have games that can be any price. They could be as low as $30, maybe $40, maybe $60. And I think that variable prices, you know, we used to have those back in the day. It used to be a $60 game. And then if it was like a mid-tier game, it'd be like $40 and shit like that. And then everything just suddenly had to be $60. In the case of Nintendo's own remasters, like Twilight Princess HD, Wind Waker, compared the effort that went into Wind Waker HD to Skyward Sword HD, it's no competition. And Skyward Sword was $60, and they put the bare minimum effort into that. Now, if you were to tell me that, hey, we're going to release these games on the Switch and they're going to be like $30, $40, I'd be like, okay. But is Nintendo going to do that? Nintendo, the company that's gotten away with releasing all of these games at full prices and people still buy them? No, they're not going to. So by that, what I think Doug Bowser is saying is, at the lowest, our games will be 60, and at the highest for right now, our games are going to be 80. So our big budget Marios, like 3D Mario, the next Zelda game, Smash Bros, all the games that we know are going to sell gangbusters, we won't charge y'all a cool $80. But for the stuff that we're kind of hesitant about, you know, we'll release it at a more modest $70. That's just what I infer from what he's saying. Now, I would love to be proven wrong if he comes out there and says like, hey, we're releasing a new Fire Emblem game, right? Or we're releasing like a pack of like the old Fire Emblem games, the remastered, but they're not to a crazy remastered degree. But here they are on the Switch 2. We're releasing like 3 games, $60. I think that's definitely doable, and I would love that. But knowing Nintendo, no, we're gonna release each of them individually for $70. It's just what it is, man. Call me the cynic, but I'm also a realist who's been playing games, especially the Nintendo game, for a very, very long time. The price itself, I mean, again, I'm not going to sit here and say gamers don't support this because it's going to set a bad precedent, but this is just the reality of the situation. It's the reality of the economic conditions of the world, and if you think Nintendo is the only company that is thinking about raising their prices to $80, I have a bridge to sell you in a place where you don't need bridges, because this is the general consensus in the industry. Developers, with the rising costs of game development, with the rising everything, the cost of living, the salaries and all that stuff, games have stayed relatively stagnant for a very long time, and now they need to catch up with it. Now, is it our fault that game budgets are getting more expensive? No, it's not. It isn't, but this is just what they think. And they think that their solution is to release games at 80, 90, maybe even $100 at some point. Now, what does that mean for you, the consumer? Well, I'm just going to tell you the same thing I've been telling y'all for the past, 16 years that I've been on YouTube now, 16, 17 years. Vote with your wallets. Vote with your wallets and go based off what you deem as quality. If the next Persona game comes out and it's $80, you know my black ass is still going to be buying that game. Why? Because I'm getting a shit ton of time and enjoyment out of it. But you might not think it's worth it at that. That's why it's hard to use the whole hours argument, like I said before. But if somebody looks at Nintendo and they're used to Nintendo giving them the high quality, high polished games where they're not buggy, they don't come out broken, and you get a great experience, they might look at that $80 and be like, hey, listen, I know y'all got all the complaints to say about this. I don't like the price, but hey, it is what it is. I like it. I enjoy it. Are you going to call them a shill for that? Maybe. But if there is one thing that I think is true, that regardless of whether or not you are for the price increase or not, the one annoying aspect is that increase in price of Nintendo games means that their games, the likelihood of them going on sale for an affordable price, it just dropped to zero. Because look at, for example, some of the biggest Switch games. How often do you see Zelda Tears of the Kingdom go on sale for $20 or Mario Kart Deluxe for $20? Not often, right? If ever. I think the lowest I've ever seen a Nintendo Switch big first-party beloved game that didn't flop go on sale was like Tears of the Kingdom 1 year for $30 at Target or something like that. And that's a rarity. Most of the time you see that game go on sale, it's like $45. That's a Nintendo Black Friday sale. $15 off. $45. 45 freaking dollars, bro. And so now you're telling me the games are $80? So them going on sale, even if it's a generous discount, it's $60. Which is absolutely crazy to me. And then there is also the big elephant in the room that we cannot ignore. The tariff situation. So you have $450 system, $80 games. Now you have the stuff happening with the tariffs and what that means for the company of Nintendo. Now, I'm not going to give y'all a whole economic lesson on tariffs and how they affect the industries, but rest assured that if shit goes according to what Trump is planned, that's going to affect a lot of these companies. And companies have been preparing for the tariffs for the past couple of months. They've been doing certain things to try to soften the blow of it. Like PlayStation's been stockpiling PS5s in the US for the time being to see if they can just do what they can to make it through the year with no issues. But eventually, if shit stays as is, it's going to affect these companies. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Well, why don't these companies that make millions upon millions, even billions of dollars, why don't they absorb the cost of the tariffs? Do you think that a company like Nintendo, who for the better part of their existence has sold their consoles at launch for profit, not taking a launch on it, making the money off on on software, and then eventually they make money on hardware with revisions, a company that has sold the Switch day one makes profit. Do you think that company is going to say, okay, we're going to absorb $125, $150 tariff and then hope for the best because of our fans? No. Now, are they poised in a position to do that because of how much money they have in the bank? Absolutely. But that's not how capitalism works, ladies and gentlemen. It's not show friends, it's show business. And a company like Nintendo is going to make sure that they're put in the best possible situation to grow revenue. That's it. And that's just the harsh reality of the world. Now, do I think that Nintendo Switch is going to cost more than $450 in the US? I'd be surprised if it does. If from the time I'm recording this video to when the system launched, if the system ends up jumping up in price, even if it's $50 to $100, that's going to be a big concern for a lot of people. And that's the biggest elephant in the room when we talk about the discussions of price and inflation and all the stuff that's happening. Like, you could sit here and you could argue that games are technically cheaper than they've ever been, because if you compare it back to the 90s when cartridges were so expensive, you could say all of those things. We can have this discussion till we're blue in the face. But the fact remains is that right now, $80 video games are extremely expensive. Very friggin' expensive. Very expensive value proposition for a lot of people out there. A $450 console, $80 games, the accessories are way more expensive now. This isn't 2017 anymore where you could buy a $300 Switch and buy some games and you'd be all right. Now with everything extremely more expensive and the cost of living has gone up and then the wages have not gone up, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing. Like if the economy was better and you released a Switch that was $450, maybe folks wouldn't have an issue with it. They'd be like, oh, that's expensive, but it'd be fine. But now that shit is going to be extremely more expensive and things have not gotten better, yeah, the Switch 2 is going to do very well, but is it going to do as good as the Switch? I don't personally think so, just given the current economic conditions, right? But again, we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. We'll see what happens as far as this administration and these companies' responses to the tariffs and what that means. But yeah, it's definitely not the best predicament for Nintendo, especially coming off of just such a meteoric success of the Switch. They go into the Switch 2 and there's just everything from, people's thoughts on the prices and then the tariffs and then all this stuff that's happening. It's not good PR whatsoever. And the fact that we had to wait a few days for the company to give clarification on it. I mean, the fact that they didn't even put the price of all this stuff in their direct. They buried it in their website. And it wasn't until people started noticing and they're just like, wait a second. That's when the sticker shock hit in. And then imagine what's going to happen when they see the stuff on the store shelves. Oh God, so the Switch 2 is way more expensive and the games are more expensive? That's a big jump. I'm being real. you know, because Nintendo for the longest time had been billed as this company that is just very family friendly, affordable, you know, like, yeah, you can get a cheap PlayStation or a cheap Xbox, but Nintendo's a system that, hey, we come out, we're cheaper than the competition. You know, we got our games that are cheaper to make and we can put out more of them than the competition. I mean, our games don't go on sale like that. But it's always just been viewed as like, hey, you can get your little son a Nintendo and then he can be satisfied with that and it's not going to be a big deal. But now you're saying that a Nintendo is going to cost the same as like a PlayStation and then the games are more expensive than a PlayStation. A lot of people are going to be looking at that like, wait, hold up, pump the fucking brakes, hold on a second. There's only one game Nintendo should release at $80, and that's a Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War remake. But until we see that happening, I question how much effort has gone into this new Mario Kart game. Like, these are the questions that really need answers, ladies and gentlemen. A Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War remake can survive an implosion of tariffs. Mario Kart World, it's going to do really good, but let's just be real for a second. But no, that's really all I got to say about this whole situation, you guys. I mean, I look forward to the Switch 2. I'm definitely going to get a Switch 2 down the road, but I'm going to hold off for a little bit because I want to see how things play out with the price. I want to see what games they have in the coming year. I mean, I already have one that I really want to play in Donkey Kong, but I need to see a little more. I need to see more that'll have me justify and stomach this exorbitant price I'm going to pay. You know what I'm saying? Because at the very least, you know, when you got the new PlayStation and the new Xbox, off rip, you had more features across the board to make your older games play better. In a lot of situations, the older games play better and it was free. In the Switch case, it's just a lot more upfront nickel and diming. And that, I think, is going to be the biggest, like, not deterrent for people, but they're definitely going to be a lot more questionable about it. Like, oh, I went from wanting this to day one to being like, okay, let's hold off. I'll definitely get it, but let's just see where this is going. Because I have no doubt in my mind that the software support is going to be amazing, as it should be, because all the best developers are cooking on the games now. But man, it's just that price. It's a different situation from 2017 where it's like, I'll buy a Switch for $300. This is a cool little thing. Now it's like, wait, this is almost as much as a new PlayStation? Okay, hold up a second. But yeah, you guys, that's all I really want to talk about today in this long, rambling, like close to 50-minute video. If you guys really enjoyed this, comment down below. Let me know. Let me know if you guys watched this all in one sitting and what were y'all doing when you were watching this? Like, what game are you playing while watching this? How was the commute home from work? Was there a lot of traffic? Let your boy know. And for media for now, my name is NGS signing out. And like always, I will catch you guys later. Peace out, y'all. Have a good one.